A very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the first edition of Audionxt Week, The Sound of Tomorrow. Audionxt is an AFAX conference where we will take a close look at India's growing audio market through in-depth discussions with some of the most important names in this space. In the last 3 days of the event, we have tried to understand, first, the factors driving the audio boom, second, the future of radio, and third, the rise of podcast. The topic for today's discussion is how local language content is driving the growth of audio consumption. On the panel, we have Dheeraj Sinha, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Strategy Officer, South Asia at Leo Burnett, Garima Surana, Co-founder and Chief Business Officer, Sochcast, Sukriti Sharma, Brand Head India, Storytel, and Vipul Batwal, VP Podcast and Monetization Products at Ghana. Welcome, everyone. Now introducing you to the moderator of the session, Ashwini Gangal, Executive Editor at AFAX. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. Over to you, Ashwini.
Thanks. Thank you, Debashish. And hi, everyone. Welcome, panel, and hi, audience. Now, welcome to day 4 of Audionxt Week. To those of you who've been with us since the beginning of the week, welcome back. And to those of you in the audience joining us for the first time at Audionxt Week today, here's a very, very quick recap of the sessions we've had so far. So on Monday, we had a discussion around the factors driving this whole audio streaming boom in India. On Tuesday, we discussed radio specifically. Yesterday, we had a discussion around podcasts specifically. And today, we're here to discuss the audio streaming space, but we look at it specifically through the prism of regional languages. Okay, now I have a lot of questions for my wonderful panel, but before I go to them, I just want to give you a quick preamble. Now, when we do panels like these, okay, at conferences like these around Indian, local or regional languages, it's all the same. There are a few recurring themes that keep coming up. Okay, so they are as follows. One is that regional languages is actually where all the opportunity lies. Okay, so we've established that beyond doubt. And of course, all these are insights from other media. Okay, so when we've discussed OTT or maybe web publishing in the context of regional languages, these insights have come up. But nevertheless, they may apply here as well. Then the second thing is that the demand for good regional language content is there, but the supply is never commensurate with that demand. So there's a gap that needs to be bridged. The third recurring theme that comes up is that there are a lot of ecosystem challenges that need urgent fixing. Okay, now these are peripheral problems that we as a community need to solve together. And these could be things like UI, UX, or font or translation, things like that. And lastly, of course, monetization remains the biggest pain point when it comes to regional languages or non-English languages. Okay, so I'm very curious to know how many of these themes apply to audio streaming and to what degree. Okay, so before I get to my specific questions for my panelists, I'd like to invite them all to just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes each and give me your brief opening remarks. Okay, now for your opening remarks specifically, I would like you, Garima, Sukirti, and Vipul, to talk about put a number to your user base, so we know how big you are. Okay, it could be any metric. It could be installs, downloads, monthly active users, any kind of metric which gives us a sense of your current user base. Then talk about and name the different languages available on your respective platforms. Okay, then give me a ratio of your English to non-English content as it stands today. And then also tell me how much of your content is behind a paywall and how much of it is freely available. That will really set the stage for what's to come in the course of the discussion. And Dheeraj, specifically for you, I would like your opening remark to be about how the seemingly modern and contemporary market of audio streaming is actually very deep-rooted in our Indian culture. And it has this rich legacy. And this whole tradition of oral knowledge transfer is actually where the audio streaming market seems to be drawing a lot of its energy today. So talk a little bit about that, bring in the cultural aspect to audio streaming. So that would be your opening remark. And then we'll take it from there. So we can start anyway. I'll start with you, Vipul.
Okay, so I'll answer your questions one by one. So on the user base, our number is out in the open. We have more than 150 million monthly active users on Ghana. The next one was English versus non-English.
Yeah,
the content catalog.
Yes, audio catalog.
Okay. Okay, I'll answer that. Before that, I'll just want to say that, I don't consider non-English as regional.
Okay.
For me, Hindi is pretty much mainstream. Punjabi is also mainstream these days,
Sure.
at least from a music standpoint.
Mhm.
But, we'll talk about more of that in this discussion. From a content catalog standpoint, English has a large catalog because, you have all these global labels, Universal, Sony, Warner, a bunch of music societies globally. So they have a large catalog, but from a consumption standpoint, at least on Ghana, uh, you know, more than 70% of the consumption is coming from non-English, right?
I
So catalog-wise, English could be much bigger. But,
Okay.
that's something that we don't really look at.
Okay.
And what was your last one?
The different languages available.
Oh, languages, I think we have 16 languages. 16, if I get the count the last time that I saw that. 16 or 17 languages we have. Apart from English, Hindi, Punjabi, we have the prominent ones we look at are, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Bengali, Gujarati, Marathi. Yeah, these are the ones that we see. I mean, obviously there are niche consumption around Urdu and other languages as well. But, more than 16 languages are available.
Okay.
Both from a music standpoint. I think podcasts today are available in like 6 or 7 languages from a content standpoint. Yeah.
Okay. And how much of it is free and how much of it is behind a paywall, just so we get a sense?
Yeah. For a music streaming platform, everything that you want to stream is free. If you have to download the content, that is when you want to pay. That is when you'll be asked you to pay.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's how it is today. Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So Kirti, why don't you go next? You need to unmute.
So Kirti, you are on mute.
I'm so sorry. I totally missed that. So in terms of subscribers, globally, we are 1.5 million. In India, I cannot give you the exact numbers, but we are in thousands and thousands of subscribers already in India. And when we talk about languages, the split of languages, though while we launched with primarily English at the beginning when we launched in 2017 November, since then to now, most of base of our catalog is 80% is English, but our Indian languages have been expanding rapidly in the last 1.5 years. We are present in, right now we've launched about 11 languages. We have 3 more to go. And we are kind of continuously expanding in Indian languages because of the kind of response that we are getting in all the regional languages.
Okay. What are the 3 that you're going to add? Just so you name them.
So see, we are already considering Punjabi. I heard that somewhere, yeah, with Ghana. So yeah, we're already considering Punjabi. Assamese is already out there. So it's going to be a couple of other languages which we, it's already in discussion. So let that come out. We already had Urdu, but we'll be adding more in that. So lots of other languages.
Okay. Great. Garima?
Actually, I think I'm going to take, a minute more to answer this question. So I think what's important here to notice that we're talking about vernacular languages and local languages, right? I think what's very important to notice here is that podcasts as a phenomena, as a concept, have always been considered an elitist concept. It has always been, people who speak English or people who understand English, right? What we are doing differently as Sochcast is, if you go back and see, podcast is an imported term with absolutely no meaning at all. It was a word that was coined by Apple. The name Sochcast itself promotes your soch, your thoughts, right? So that's the base point here that I'd like to set here, that we are focusing heavily on local Indian languages. From content perspective, what you asked, currently we have over 18,000 minutes of original content on our platform, proliferated in languages like Hindi, English, Marathi, Telugu, Sanskrit, Gujarati, Bengali, Kannada, and we are expanding, with more and more Sochcasts that provide value. So we have people, and these are Sochcasts which are not just, it's a fine balance of information and entertainment. So we have subject matter experts, giving out their information. So it's always very value driven at, Sochcast, what we do.
Sure. Yeah, I saw that on your LinkedIn page as well. You've sort of said podcast is a meaningless term.
It is. It's a
Interesting.
word, just for a little trivia for anybody who doesn't know, in the audience, it's a word that was coined by Apple when iPods, were a rage. And what we are trying to do is, the name, how do you make it relatable for people in remote areas? They will never understand podcast. And I think I was listening to one of your other sessions where Sandeep from Khabri was
Yesterday,
saying,
yeah.
yes, where Sandeep was saying that don't call them podcast, call them audio for people.
That's
Because
right.
they will never understand when contents become relatable. And we've seen this from other platforms. Only when something is relatable, it hits you there. Right. So for it to become relatable, you need to change the language and tweak it for the Indian audience, right?
The nomenclature. Yeah, that's always interesting. I'll come back to you, Garima. Dheeraj, why don't you go with your opening remarks?
Yeah, I think we are talking about two aspects of audio, right? One is the music and the other is podcast, sochcast, audio, whatever you call it. And the two have very different trajectories, right? And cutting back to the cultural, social context, India is obviously a oral tradition, right? I mean, and we have centuries of tradition of and or even just back in our pop culture. I mean, the whole idea of commentary, radio commentary, right? And about 2 decades ago, you'll have people holding the radio to their ear and listening to commentary and so on and so forth. So music is easier to drive in audio, right? Podcast still fledgling. We need to build the category. I mean, I have this formula which I call RFP, right? Relevance, familiarity, and popularity. These are the 3 factors that need to kick in for any new idea or any new framework to gain currency. And relevance obviously is about content. I mean, if it is about podcast, tomorrow, suppose if you have Gurbani on podcast, or if you have all the religious stuff on podcast, if you have cricket on podcast, right? So if you have competition success review, learning how to crack IS interviews, coming on podcast, right? Suddenly that relevance and that meaning system widen the appeal, right? Now, relevance is also because you have to understand last 2 decades, we've also become a video market, right? So people are listening, but probably they are listening on YouTube. So the video is running, but the primary use is perhaps audio. Now, what is the role of audio in the context of video? Because video is not going away.
Absolutely.
Right? So do you say that while you are going for that walk, or while you're laughing in the park, or while you're doing your laundry? And so relevance at 2 levels. One is content, and second is where does it sit with respect to behavior. Familiarity is second big. Where do I look for it? Right. I just launched my podcast, Speak Easy with Dheeraj Sinha, and we are talking to top-end marketing business audience. And somebody commented on my LinkedIn, where can I find the full video? Right. And then they found it, and they commented like, sorry, we found it, and so on and so forth. But how do you make it easy for people to discover, right? So that I don't have now download another app, right? So Vipul here will gain because Ghana is already there in people's mobile phones. Spotify will gain because some of these platforms are already there. You're not asking for a dramatic shift there. So that's the familiarity part. And the third, which we undermine, is what I call popularity, or what most networks call the network effect, right? The idea has to gain currency, right? I will get on podcast because Ashwin is on podcast, or Chris is on podcast, right? It's what happened to Clubhouse at an elite level, right? So RFP, right? Relevance through content and role, familiarity, comfort, ease of switching in, right? I mean, the idea of Saregama music through a radio-like box. Familiarity. Maybe you need to do some of those interventions for this to gain currency in a big way. And a network effect for everybody to feel that this is gaining currency. Yes, people are listening to Gurbani on podcast, or yes, people are listening to competition success review tips on podcast. And then that's when the currency will happen. We have the cultural underpinning, so it's easier, but you still need things for it to get big currency.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you for that. That's great. Okay, now I want to start with an obvious question, but I think it's the most important one. So Kirti, Garima, and Vipul, tell me about the most popular languages on your platforms. Regional languages, and also talk about the most popular genres within regional languages. And when genre and language interact, are there any language specific trends that you can share with us? Anyone can go.
Okay, so maybe I'll take this one. And in context of Storytel, because our focus is a lot on Indian languages, and especially because of a lot of points already covered, and that includes relevance and the very habit of how we've been consuming stories ever since, we've grown up consuming in our mother tongue. So when we talk about Storytel and the reason and the genesis for launching and the thought behind going into so many languages is that people love to consume stories in their own languages. Now, if you talk about popular ones on Storytel, like Marathi is very popular, and it's also in terms of stories. Like, for example, what's really doing well in Marathi? Now, it also depends on the kind of literature which is popular. It's like Mrityunjay is a cult classic. Now that has been continuously being in top. It has been on top of the chart ever since we launched it. So that drives the classic consumption. But having said that, is that the only one? So not really. When people consume romance, people consume crime. And if you ask me, does the trend shift? So when I talk about Tamil, and which is another, it's really growing in popularity since ever since I'm focusing in on Tamil market particularly. Again, it's driven by classic consumption. Again, rules over there. It's again driven, by a cult classic called Ponniyin Selvan. So again, topping the charts. So yes, it differs. If you ask me in English, what's really being consumed, it's romance. So language-wise, if we look at Bengali, it's split between classics, crime, and fiction. So so one is what genre, the other is also the demand for certain titles and authors, which also drives the consumption of the genre particularly.
Okay, no, that is interesting. Okay, Garima, have you spotted any language specific trends in terms of the types of content people are patronizing?
Yes, Tamil, as Sukirti said, is a big hit for us as well. Kannada is again, very big. We have around 4,000 minutes of content in Kannada specifically. And as I said, we're expanding more and more in that language. Genre-wise, if I have to tell you, self-help content, anything that motivates you, content that's feel-good content, motivational, spiritual, health-related content. So health and wellness has definitely been a big hit for us. Fiction in in native language. So storytelling in native language is a big hit for us. And you were also speaking about monetization, of how marketeers are now trying to reach out to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Very interestingly, one of the briefs that as of today I'm working on is by an international organization asking to promote Kannada language. Like their entire brief, they wanted to be promoted on audio in Kannada. So that's a big hit. We're approaching this slowly. It's a total walk, but we're definitely going to get there.
Yeah, of course, I'm going to get to monetization in just a while. But Vipul, up to the earlier question, any genre-specific trends you can share with us, podcast specifically?
Podcast? Oh.
Yes.
Podcast, see the way we have approached podcast, we started calling, so this is links to the points that Dheeraj and Garima made.
Yeah.
We started podcast on Ghana as radio. We never called it podcast for like 6-8 months.
Right.
For the same reason that some of these guys talked about, right?
Okay.
Because our podcasts are not podcasts. They're just spoken word content. It is not like 2 people talking or 10 people talking to each other.
Okay.
They are like, Mahabharata is a podcast. Bhagavad Gita is also a podcast. 10 other stories are also podcasts. So, but then what happened? Some of these radio guys started producing podcasts and they started advertising these podcasts on their radio.
Right. Okay.
And they started calling it podcast. We thought that when the big radio channels are calling it podcast and advertising them on their own radio channels, we should also probably change it, because then we changed the name to podcast.
Okay.
In terms of, so that is how we did. And, and in terms of genre, I see the consumption trends that we have seen so far in the past, 24 months that we have been around in podcasts in India is, we have seen a lot of motivational self-help content, a lot of devotional content, all this satsang and Hanuman Chalisa and all that. This kind of content gets a lot of uptake. There's a lot of musical content where you have music embedded in, and then you have spoken word and music together in that.
Okay, so
Such content is seeing a lot of horror, thriller is seeing a lot of uptake in stories. Language-wise, Hindi is the biggest language so far, but that can change anytime as and when. In podcast, at least, it's not just a demand issue. In other languages, it's also a supply issue. We don't have a lot of content in various languages apart from Hindi, right? So as and when we create content, I think demand will be there, but we haven't created a lot of content primarily because of various priorities in the system. And so that is how it is in podcast. I mean, obviously in music, Hindi, Punjabi, the South Indian languages are the big ones. Bhojpuri is big, Haryanvi is big.
Okay.
Nothing compared to Hindi, but these are growing languages. Genre-wise, again, romance, devotional, retro. These are the stuff that has been doing well. And romance does well anytime. So.
No, so apart from English and Hindi for podcasts, which is the next biggest language for you? Regional.
Regional, we do Tamil, Telugu. That's because, see, it will be unfair to say it is the biggest language because we have created supply only in those languages.
Right.
Today we don't know whether there is a demand in those languages or not, because I have not personally gone and created a Bhojpuri podcast. Right? The day I do that and the day I focus on that, that's when I know that there is a demand.
Then it will be fair to say this is
the It is only data specific to what I have seen.
Got it. Okay, I understand. Right. Okay, now, my next question, before I get to monetization, of course, I want to just understand whether we're profiling the regional language audio content consumer correctly. Okay. Now, just rewind to a few years ago when video began to boom. It had a lot to do with the data boom and the device boom. Okay, I'm talking about regional. And a lot of the demand for regional language video content came from people who were new to the internet. They were first timers in many ways. So that told us a lot about them, right? My question is, how demographically different is the consumer of non-English audio content from the early adopter of non-English video content from a few years ago?
I mean, at least I wouldn't have that. I mean, comparing audio and video for me at least would be difficult. But I can tell you that vernacular versus English, right?
Right.
From a demographic standpoint, if I look at age and the tier 2, tier 3 structure of the cities, I can tell you a lot of tier 2, tier 3 guys are consuming what a tier 1 guys consume.
Okay.
I mean, cities like Jaipur, Patna, Indore, they are consuming a lot of, probably the same amount of EDM music as a tier 1 consumes. So, probably lockdown has shaken that trend further because you never know where the consumption is coming from. All the tier 1 guys have gone to their tier 2 homes and they're consuming it from there.
Right. That's fair. Right.
Ashwini, you'll have to, I think it'd be very different for, say, a category like podcast versus a category like music, right?
I agree.
So in music, for example, or say even entertainment, right? People are, across, say, SECs and classes, right? People want to consume content in their language, and that's a big pattern. Right? So a lot of marketing, for example, right, for big brands, Procter & Gamble, Spotify, PhonePe, etc. Now we are doing language up rather than national down. So that's with music and mainstream consumption. With podcasts, I would imagine that there is an English audience, which is, the podcast, so to say, audience where the debate and liberal ideas are being exchanged, and startup podcast is doing well, and so on and so forth. But there will be a tier 2, tier 3 entry audience, which is coming in its language, and more an audience for, say, cricket, Bollywood, self-help, and education, because those are the big categories in which bulk of main India consumes content, right? That's where you sell, right? Self-help and competition success is the biggest seller in books as well, and that is being mimicked in podcasts as well.
Right, but Dheeraj, yesterday, Vipul, go ahead.
I just think from a video versus audio standpoint, right? There are a lot of interesting trends that we see. in terms of content consumption. There could be, at least in terms of podcasts, like we have seen that it's not necessary that a lot of sports content can do well in spoken word. It might do well in video. I mean, even if I do a live commentary on sports,
Mhm.
it may just not come on board.
Hmm.
They are still looking at video. Now,
Correct.
this trend can change post the lockdowns, when people are traveling, because audio has a lot of travel use case as well.
Hmm.
And the travel use case has suffered heavily in the past 2 years.
Mhm.
So, right now it's all about video because people are sitting in their homes. So video generally gets priority for a content which can be consumed via both video and pure audio.
Hmm.
So that, the past 2 years data will always be biased,
Yes.
in the favor of video. Purely, and your point about, why the tier 2 guys suddenly showed a burst in consumption on video. I think that was driven by the data streaming costs, which went suddenly,
Yeah.
dipped because of
Yeah,
the
it
advent
wasn't
of
about
Geo.
why. Yeah. I'm just saying that the early adopters of video were a certain type when it came to regional. So we knew them, we had profiled them right. But when it comes to the early adopters of audio, I get a sense that we're a little confused about who this listener really is. Is she new to the internet, or is she someone maybe like Sukirti, who's bilingual and who's classified as an English language user in internet parlance, but also samples maybe Punjabi language content.
A lot of regional language users, according to me, who would be the early adopters of audio, would be the bilingual guys.
Right.
Except, in certain cases, like, when I say bilingual, by the way, I'm including Hindi also in mainstream.
Yes.
Hindi and Bhojpuri, English and Tamil, those are the kind of combinations I'm looking at. Yeah. So mostly, you'll have very little audience doing only Bhojpuri or only Haryanvi or only Urdu. Mostly bilingual guys will be the early
And when we
adopters.
talk about, yeah. So I just wanted to add a point that when we talk about early adopters, especially in the case of audiobooks, because our first filter becomes people who have some sort of affinity or love for books. So that's a given. Because podcast existed before, but audiobooks is relatively new in the market. The first interest comes from people who love books in some form or the other, or at least have aspiration to consume books. Like you rightly said, yeah, bilingual. The other important filter is the aspect of who we call today as digital natives, which means people who have now some sort of habit of using apps for entertainment, for various purposes. They are the people who are actually becoming our early adopters if we go by the behavior. And that's why we see a lot of these subscribers coming from metros, because that's where that core set of digital natives are existing at this moment.
Okay, yeah. Garima, do you want to answer the question or?
Sure. So I think from a creator and a listener perspective, both. I see a lot of my creators on my platform come from places like Bhubaneswar, like remote areas in Ranchi or Jaipur, or like Sirsi, Indore, these kind of places. Now, these are my creators, right? Who are consuming and creating content.
Correct.
Right. And what is very interesting to know is that, as Vipul mentioned, we do not have enough demand in other languages to gauge what's working, what's not working. Just comparing video to audio, the early adopters is an apples and oranges, comparison right now. So I think there's a long way to go to figure out what's really working for us at this point in time.
I just have a quick observation.
Audio is that it actually triggers you to be imaginative. What video does is it serves you right there. Television was called idiot box for simply because it could give you information and visuals, everything right there on a table or on your plate. Audio really triggers that imagination for you.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Dheeraj, you had a point.
Quick observation, the whole idea, the internet is about reading, right? I mean, it's text oriented, right? What voice has done, if you look at how consumption is happening, voice has helped people bypass that. And therefore, voice and vernacular are the big drivers of growth, whether it is on search or and it will also play out on reading, right? Because you want access to that content, you want access to that recipe, you want access to that tip on education, and it'll come easier in your language, and it'll come easier through voice. That's where whole pattern will go, right? About among 500 million users of Google Voice Assistant, right? Hindi is the second biggest language globally. So that tells you how this adoption is going to go and the reason why.
Right. No, that's interesting. We have a lot of questions coming in, and some of them are about monetization. So let's speak about that now. Vipul, I'll start with you. How hard is it, to monetize regional language audio content? What are the conversations with brands like, and which product categories are warming up to this content?
Brands, at least from a advertisement standpoint, right? I mean, for us, monetization is twofold. One is ads and then subscription.
Yes.
So from an ad standpoint, brands want to target the audience. They have criteria on the audience profile. I mean, most of them generally, no one comes, and there are few people who come and ask, I want to target only Bhojpuri consuming audience. They don't care what that guy is consuming. They want to target him. Right? So for them, it's mostly audience driven. There's a lot of demand these days to target people in tier 2, tier 3 cities, which is happening. So that we have seen, but we haven't seen a lot of people coming and saying, I want to target Punjabi consuming audience. I want to target X language and all that. And otherwise it's just mainly audience profile that they want to target. And that guy could be doing anything on my platform or someone else's platform, as long as they're willing to target. As long as they get to target that audience, it's fine. From a subscription standpoint, obviously the ARPU of non-mainstream languages. That's how the word I use, because for me, Hindi and Punjabi is fairly mainstream. For the non-mainstream languages, ARPUs are low.
Okay.
Because they buy the lower value packs. And obviously, we also need to do a lot of work in terms of how we convey the benefits of subscription in the user's language. Like we don't convey, we assume that he's going to understand English. I don't know whether he understands what is ad free. Maybe I have to tell him Vigyapan ke bina. I don't tell that today, right? So I haven't done a good job around that. Maybe I have to do a few things and then check. But ARPUs are today, at least the ARPUs are lower for non-mainstream languages when compared to the mainstream ones. But it can change pretty soon, and it depends on how innovative one can get catering to these audiences and how the demand grows in these languages.
Yeah, because it's one thing to read about hyper-contextual advertising in audio, and it's one thing to read about dynamic and live, live ad insertions. But it's another to actually, get the good, bad, and ugly from you on a panel like this. So, Garima, Sukirti, talk about monetization. How difficult is it? What do you struggle with on that front?
Sure. So I'll tell you what, and the biggest challenge which is there is that in India, we learned to consume content digitally, which was pretty much free. So we are about audiobooks, and we are certainly not free of cost. So, yes, there is a monthly subscription. And like you use the word challenge, yes, it is challenging. But having said that, the way we are growing, the way the category consumption is growing, we certainly know there is a market. People are willing to pay for valuable content. The challenge here is that they need to see value, and like the point that Dheeraj made some time back about relevance. So these two things become very, very important, because Indian consumer, by and large, sitting in any corner of India, is very price sensitive. So, but at the same time, the moment we have seen, and we being digital, being a digital platform, we see data in and out. There are people who actually have been consuming us for months. They actually end up paying for the annual subscription or a 6-month subscription. The reason being is that now they have already seen the value. Then money does not become an issue. Money is an issue when you don't know what you're paying for or what you're going to get out of it. So it's also an outcome of habit. So yes, it's challenging initially to get people, explain the relevance, or also help them see the value, which is pretty much our job in terms of letting them see, also identifying the consumer behavior and needs of what is one looking for in terms of content. And then making content like that, because we have originals, and that is where we, kind of match or map the need gap, you can say, which means if there is certain kind of content which is missing, let's say in Marathi, we will go ahead and make our original series and cater to that need. So clearly there is a market. Of course, it is challenging, but at the same time, there is a paying market sitting there.
Sure. Yeah. And I see there are two things over here. One is, of course, advertisers, and the other one is paying consumers. So people, I'll come back to you before I get Garima in. There's a very simple question in our chat box, and that kind of sums it all up, really. Is the future of audio streaming, I'll just add regional languages as a qualifier in brackets there. Is the future of regional language audio streaming AVOD or SVOD?
So, the question seems very simple to ask. See, from a business sustainability standpoint, the subscription business model is much better because you're getting the user to pay for the content, an experience which is going to be free of ads, and a lot more that I can give. I mean, how can I increase the value of that subscription, at least from a music streaming context, if I have to talk about?
Right.
There are, apps like Storytel and Hotstar and Netflix, they have all the content behind the paywall. But in the case of music streaming, at least from a pure streaming standpoint, everything is outside the paywall. So how can I increase the value of the subscription from a music streaming standpoint going forward so that the users actually would like to pay and they understand the value of paying for music or for podcast or for any other audio content that we do in future? That would decide how the subscription ecosystem scales in a country like India. Apart from, there are a lot of payment related issues in the ecosystem in India from a subscription business standpoint, which have to be resolved. No, the answer to the question is I would definitely like it to be SVOD. Now, because pure AVOD cannot put the bread on the table that I'm looking for, given my expenses.
Okay. No, that's straightforward. Yeah, right. Now, but if we're talking about brands, Vipul and even Garima, which product categories do you see advertiser money coming from?
Can I take this one?
Yeah.
Okay. I think, see, we're in the very early innings of monetization. And I will answer this question again from a creator, because I'm a creator myself. I have, my own Sochcast, and I will answer this from a business point of view because I also look at business for Sochcast. As a creator, what I learned is everybody can create content, but not everybody knows how to sell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Which is why we created Podcast, which is a marketplace where you connect advertisers and Sochcasters. Right? Now, as a creator, the biggest pain point is discoverability. We're so used to algorithmically driven feeds that it's, to go out of our way to discover something new is a challenge. To get my first 1,000 listeners, I tried everything under the sun, right from blowing my own trumpet shamelessly to, doing emails and, WhatsApp messages, everything. So I think from a creator standpoint, in terms of monetization, it's very difficult to sell your own product. From a business standpoint, what is lacking is metrics, lack of education, right? And that's what we're doing. We actually take out a how-to audio series, and we're doing this pilot with agencies. Mrs. Sashi Sinha was on your panel sometime, I think on the first day.
On Monday, that's right.
Piloted that with IPG Media Brands, and we recently finished a campaign where we advertised for Spotify on Sochcast. Now that's a huge case study, right? So I think a lot of education needs to go, in the agency side where, and how the agencies are structured is that we have these top 10 agencies who have most of the brand mandates. So I think once these guys understand that a podcasting is not a format which is ROI driven, it's not a performance metric, and there needs to be a lot of education. It's branding, it's top of the funnel, right? And that's when you start to realize the difference of how we've already seen the trends in the West. The recall value that a podcast gives you. It's tremendous. People remember your ad. And for a brand to slide into somebody's ears, it's incredible. No other platform will actually make you listen to a brand. And that's where you can, really leverage a medium like audio. The average listen time of my podcast is 19 minutes. Imagine somebody giving you their undivided attention for 19 minutes. We work with brands in sanitary wear. We work with brands in sexual wellness. We've recently done an ad for an apparel wear. So if you're here to sell your toothpaste and shampoos and those kind of things, podcasting is not the place. We're here to talk about the what, how, when, how of your brand that no influencer, even with millions of reach, can give you that in a 30-second or a 1-minute reel. We give you that place to talk about your brand, and that's why brands in fintech or in the finance space, they have so much demystification, so much education. They have so much to tell. That's where
Yeah. On the panel you mentioned, we also had Jehil Thakkar from Deloitte, and he said SMEs are actually one of the surprise categories, and they'll probably maybe see merit in this platform. Dheeraj, I know you may not have this conversation necessarily with your clients, but what's word on the street like when it comes to audio streaming content, and which categories do you think advertiser money will come from?
There are two slices to what we are chatting here, right? One is regional coming of age. Of course, it is coming of age, right? I mean, in fact, now we have many marketing departments being structured region down. And this is not just about the language, also about the insight, right? I mean, what's going on in Tamil Nadu versus Kerala versus West Bengal versus Punjab. And those are the 4-5 markets that a lot of marketers are now focusing on. So that's happening in a big way, obviously. And a lot of advertising money is now going to flow into the region. I mean, that writing is on the wall. In fact, as we speak, I am setting up something that I'm calling Leo Burnett Regional, which has the strategic and creation capability to create for Andhra, for Tamil Nadu, for West Bengal, for Punjab, right? So that gives you a sense of what's happening to the regional language. On podcasts, still early days. I concur with Garima. We have clients in finance space who have taken to it, and we are working some ideas for them on podcasts. But largely, it's categories which need concept sell. Right, that's what is going in right now. But see, it's about how the segment is being marketed, right, and how this will get marketed in next 2-3 years. So Vipul with Ghana and Spotify and everybody, right, there is my sense is next 2-3 years you'll have so much energy being built in this category that it will open floodgates beyond just concept selling. I mean, right now we're talking concept selling because you have podcast with average time of 20 minutes, 40 minutes. Tomorrow you may have podcast with 3 minutes, right? And then suddenly it might make sense for an FMCG come in. So my sense, very early days, right? This will open up very, very fast. Is what my sense is.
Okay, great. No, that's wonderful. We have just enough time for closing remarks. So I'm going to ask you all for one word, okay? Just one word for your closing remarks. What does the audio streaming space need in the context, of course, of regional languages for things to go well over the next 12 to 24 months? What's that one thing that this space needs? Language audio streaming in India. It's a magic wand question. So if you could, what's that one thing? Vipul?
The right product.
You mean technology product? No.
Yeah, I mean the right product. Like Ghana is a product for us, right?
Okay.
And the right product for that user.
Right.
So it's a very different user journey that a regional language guide takes, according to me.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. Okay, so Kirti?
We definitely have debated and discussed this also. It's also about adoption, and it's clearly about that. And at this point in time, people who have already reached a certain curve are the ones who are trying. So all said and done, even when we have an ACE product, which is of course, like he rightly said, it's pretty much important and needed. At the same time, it's also about slowly taking on to the habit of audio. Like, for example, I'll just close by saying that when we started, average listening hours were 4. Now they've jumped to 11 hours. So that's a journey that has happened in the last 2 years that we can talk about.
So the one thing would be more time spent then?
Yes, it's a habit that will build over time.
Habit. Okay, got it. Correct. Dheeraj, Garima, in that order?
I would say relevance, right? Both through content and marketing. Look at how adoption happens in India, right? You build IRCTC, right, where you don't have to stand in long queues and get you can get railway tickets done, right? 2 decades ago, right? India had maximum adoption of that platform because it was relevant, right? It saved you from something. So relevance building. Suddenly you have content available in my language, which helps me, as I said, clear IAS or do my devotion or do my yoga. It'll happen, and obviously marketing to build that. I mean, that's how all concepts get built in India.
So it's
So
more of a content answer then, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Garima, what about you? What does the space need? The one thing.
I think I answered that, in my previous question. Education is something which is so important at this point. And there's so many people who think radio is synonymous to podcasts. That first entry barrier needs to be broken. We need to educate both from the brand side, the creator side, and only then when the ecosystem will truly grow. I think that's very, very important. All other metrics will follow. I understand we're still scratching the surface when it comes to podcasting in India, but that's because we do not have enough education. The brand's not convinced that it can be a platform for your brand to have a loyal community, higher brand resonance. So I think education.
Fantastic. No, great answers, everybody. Thank you very much for your insights and your time. And that's all we have time for on day 4. Thank you, audience. Please come back tomorrow at 4 o'clock for the last session of Audio Next Week. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.